Welcome to the film analysis, today with May-December by Todd Haynes. The title refers to a relationship with an exceptionally large age difference. The film is not just a film, it's a film review, and it's the most complex film of the year. A philosophy of acting is also shown here. We are in Savannah, Georgia. 23 years ago, Gracie, then in her mid-30s, had a relationship with a 13-year-old boy called Joe. She became pregnant by him, she was sent to prison, the two then married and started a family. They still live together in the same place. Her children and her husband from her first marriage are also still there. This story is based on a true incident that made the headlines. How do you tell a story like this? You inevitably fall into a number of presentation traps. You could become ordinary or gimmicky, or you could turn the cinema into a courtroom. Todd Haynes' idea is ingenious. It forces us to consider the depiction on several levels. Natalie Portman plays the actor Elizabeth. She is a star who is now going to play Gracie in an independent film in order to get to know Gracie, played by Julianne Moore, in order to study her. Elizabeth will now spend a few days with Gracie, Joe and the family. Elizabeth will try to elicit secrets from Gracie and the others. She will feign understanding. She will develop an erotic or just professional interest in Joe. Suspicion is always the order of the day in everything we see. We experience the couple's everyday life and ask ourselves, is this love now? Who is manipulating whom? Todd Haynes plays with many references and scrutinizes his own actions, because every director not only manipulates the characters but also his audience. He has often dealt with melodrama, and here he takes it up again. He refers to Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows, a film that also tells the story of a woman falling in love with a much younger man, but there is no legal boundary being crossed. It is mainly social conventions that get in the way. Todd Haynes also uses very interesting music. He chose Michel Legrand's theme from the film The Go-Between from the 70s. The music is also supposed to release mistrust in us, because this film not only refers to melodrama but also to soap operas. And so there is a dramatic use of music when Julianne Moore, for example, opens the fridge door and says, "I don't think we have enough hot dogs." We are supposed to feel ironic about the whole thing, but not just ironic, because every now and then the music is also used in the way we know it from a classic Hollywood film. Cinematographer Christopher Blaufeld has used old lenses from the 1940s. He also works with filters and strong backlighting. He made a conscious decision not to shoot in high definition. After all, it must be said that HD is the technology of the positivist age, which is characterized by the fact that you must only show everything exactly, that if you have absolute sharpness, you get particularly close to the truth. But the truth, as we are about to learn, lies somewhere else, or maybe it doesn't exist at all. Through these lenses, through this visual language, something multi-layered emerges. Gracie and Joe's house is right by the sea, and the sea itself has something cinematic about it, which is then reflected in the windows. This creates an incredibly special atmosphere in which we are always remarkably close to the cinema. But we are also somewhere in an everyday life that is based on lies. So we are also playing with the aesthetics of the soap opera, with TV series from the 80s and 90s. You might think of The Bold and the Beautiful. And then there are these furious cinema shots. Even when Gracie walks alone through the small forest, you can valorize or devalue every banal scene cinematographically, as Todd Haynes shows us. You can turn anything into rubbish or exaggerate it. The camera adopts various perspectives, including those of the tabloids or art house cinema. It's always about cliched images, but where is the line between melodrama and soap opera? And doesn't Alive move back and forth between rubbish and great art? When does it become tasteless? The case seems simple enough. We are looking at a woman who seduced a minor and was sent to prison for it. The legal framework is clear. Haynes then also gives Joe a key scene in which he asks Gracie, "What if I was too young?" Suddenly he tears down the scaffolding on which the entire relationship stands. But Todd Haynes is not a judge or a lawyer here, but he wants to show us something else. He wants to radically question truth and credibility. That is the principle of his film, because it always concerns what do the characters say. Can we believe them? And if they are telling the truth, then perhaps we are not right, or it's not right for their relatives. There's a dress rehearsal for Gracie and Joe's daughter, who is about to celebrate her graduation. She's wearing a sleeveless dress, and Gracie says, "Yes, that's great that you are so brave to show your arms, even though they are a bit big. I would never have dared to do that. You are just a modern woman." Her poisoned compliment is one that also expresses a truth for her. That's how she sees her daughter. But, of course, it is completely inappropriate to give her daughter such a poisoned compliment. So what if we don't want to hear the truth? We have no idea whether the truth is being spoken and whether we always tell ourselves the truth. Elizabeth says to Gracie, "I want to watch you here and I want to make a film in which you know you are understood." She's talking about profundity in a very typical way, as we know it from actor interviews, where there is actually no profundity at all, and this ethical concern doesn't prevail. Todd Haynes takes great pleasure in showing these two great actresses confronting each other in rivalry and mistrust, how their vanities clash. And then there's Joe in between, played by Charles Melton, who makes you wonder, is he also up to some cold game, or is he perhaps a point of sincerity after all? In any case, we learn from him that he did some research on the internet before Elizabeth came to visit. He Googled what she looks like naked. He watched her adverts repeatedly. And so we can deduce that there is also desire on his part. The neighbors, on the other hand, have been sharing white lies with Gracie the whole time. After her time in prison, she has reverted to baking cakes for everyone all the time because they are supposedly so popular. Her little business. However, we learn that hardly anyone wants these cakes anymore, and just to avoid driving her into disaster, the neighbors keep ordering cakes from her. Who could you talk to truthfully in this film? Joe tries to talk to his father, but the two men remain silent. But then Joe ends up on the roof with his son before he sets off into adult life. It is a loving and empathetic conversation, but only because they are both under the influence of cannabis. The film's complexity lies in the fact that wherever we think we can grasp something, it immediately slips away. Elizabeth will turn into Gracie. She will imitate her gestures and facial expressions. She will paint her lips the same way, no doubt to prepare herself for the role she must play in a few weeks, but also to seduce Joe, because Elizabeth is just as old now as Gracie was when Joe was 13. Acting is seduction, and seduction is power, and we can ask ourselves in which situations we act, seduce, and thus manipulate, acting out power. Todd Haynes shows us how films manipulate us, but also how we want to be manipulated and how we ourselves become manipulators. And that leads us to the actual script of this film. There is an interesting text from the 18th century. It is by Denis Diderot, and it's called The Paradox of the Actor. In this text, Diderot distinguishes between actors who are hot, who bring their true emotions into the theater, and those who remain completely cold and who only observe mechanics, who imitate and who always have everything under control, who don't give themselves completely to the role. Diderot writes, the extravagant creature who loses his self-control has no hold on us. This is gained by the man who is self-controlled. The same applies to seduction. We are seduced by someone who has himself under control and thus takes us under his wing and thus has us under control. Diderot continues to write, on the other hand, the actor who plays from thought, from study of human nature, from constant imitation of some ideal type, from imagination, from memory, will be one and the same at all performances, will be always at his best mark he has considered, combined, learned, and arranged the whole thing in his head. His diction is neither monotonous nor dissonant. He will be invariable, a looking glass, as it were, ready to reflect realities and to reflect them ever with the same precision, the same strength and the same truth. End of quote. So that's what makes great acting. And here we have already mentioned that the actor is a mirror. This mirror takes in everything that is shown to it. That's exactly what the film shows us. We often see the two women in the mirror, while Elizabeth studies Gracie closely. Very cold. The camera supports Elizabeth's art of seduction. For example, we see Elizabeth visiting a school in Savannah where Gracie was once a teacher. Elizabeth has promised to answer the pupils' questions there. Of course, the first question comes straight to the point. One boy asks, what is it like to shoot sex scenes as an actor? Then the camera starts to slowly zoom in closer and closer to Elizabeth, who is simply sitting there in a dark room. The pupils don't really know how to react to what they have heard. They are a little embarrassed. Then she starts to tell them that it's often pure mechanics, but sometimes it is a real erotic experience. The question is it just a game? Or am I experiencing real pleasure here? Elizabeth doesn't just tell it, she breathes it. And she seduces the underage pupils with her speech. She's remarkably close to what Gracie once did. The zoom then intensifies this inappropriate intimacy arising there. And so acting appears to us as an art of seduction, which is above all tactics and strategy. Joe, on the other hand, is a completely different character, and Elizabeth also reflects on whether Joe has had this quiet self-confidence that has characterized him since childhood, or whether he has trained himself to have it. Either way, he seems to be perhaps not as cold as the others in the game. Perhaps he is a sincere character, if there is such a thing. The film leaves that unclear, but it perhaps suggests it to us a little. Then there is a tremendous, because we talked about the mirror, makeup scene. We see Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman, and the older one shows the younger one how she always puts on her makeup, and we realize here that the truth is created when you put on a mask. Elizabeth imitates all of this. This mirror scene also shows that inner thoughts can be produced mechanically. What's important in film is that the surface is right. May December is a very amusing, a very vicious and cold film, but again, through this character of Joe, it makes us empathize, makes us take the subject very seriously. And yet, with everything we see in the film, we can ask ourselves to what extent we are being shown something truthful here. Or rather, we can also ask ourselves whether it matters at all. It's certainly the case that Elizabeth, the actress, is the one who displays the greatest lack of emotion. There's a scene in which Gracie seems to reveal herself a little, shows a little of what's going on inside her. And we see these two women in the mirror. They are sitting there. We can see both their faces while Gracie is exposing herself. We see how Elizabeth is already imitating Gracie's mouth, imitating her laughter, her somewhat nervous movements. Diderot writes in Paradox of the Actor, great poets, great actors, and I may add all great copies of nature in whatever art, beings gifted with fine imagination, with broad judgment, with exquisite tact, with a sure touch of taste, are the least sensitive of all creatures. They are too apt for too many things, too busy with observing, considering and reproducing, to have their inmost hearts affected with any liveliness. End of quote. We are therefore dealing with a film that captivates us and at the same time repels us. Who can you believe? Gracie says at one point, I am naive. She says this with her lips painted a soft pink color. But do these lips speak the truth? Who is Gracie really? Or who is Elizabeth? Does she just want to know how to play the part? Joe will also look in the mirror once after crossing the line. And this question does indeed appear there, that he has changed, that he is no longer who he was a few moments ago. Is this a real guy? At the same time, the film tells us again, we can't be completely sure because Joe, we learn, texts a foreign woman every day, secretly and in detail. Then there is the exchange in which Joe asks Gracie, what if I was too young? She jumps up and warns him that the graduation ceremony is coming up soon and that he shouldn't get out of character now. So we always play theater, as Irving Goffman said. Then there is the most wonderful mirror scene, perhaps one of the best scenes of the entire film year. We see how great acting is born entirely out of craftsmanship. For we see Natalie Portman as Elizabeth standing there and now slipping into the role of Gracie. She reads in front of a mirror a letter that Gracie once addressed to Joe. Elizabeth wants to study whether she is already good enough to play this Gracie. Diderot writes something quite astonishing in his text. You almost get the impression that he has seen the film. He writes, now I will tell you a thing I have actually seen. Garrick, at the time a famous actor, will put his head between two folding doors, and in the course of 5 or 6 seconds, his expression will change successively from wild delight to temperate pleasure, from this to tranquility, from tranquility to surprise, from surprise to blank astonishment, from that to sorrow, from sorrow to the air of one overwhelmed, from that to fright, from fright to horror, from horror to despair, and thence he will go up again to the point from which he started. Can his soul have experienced all these feelings and played this kind of scale in concert with his face? I don't believe it. End of quote. We experience something similar with Natalie Portman recites this letter, and her face is transformed when she really looks like Julianne Moore and seems ecstatic to see this boy again. But can we believe that there is anything internal there? Of course we can't. All of this is craft. Before the actor Elizabeth arrives at Gracie's house, Gracie fears that she is about to meet a star. Is she going to sit there with big sunglasses on the whole time? When the women meet for the last time at the end of the film, they are both wearing large sunglasses. It is also interesting that a dialogue takes place at the first meeting that reminds us of what Diderot wrote. He says, being true is it showing things as they are in nature? Certainly not. And we've already learned that the cameraman uses old lenses, filters and backlighting to create a special mood. So it's not about reality TV. This silly attempt to portray reality as it is. You can only show something truthful by introducing something artificial. Diderot goes on to say, were it so, the true would be the commonplace. What then is truth for stage purposes? It is the conforming of action, diction, voice, movement and gesture to an ideal type invented by the poet and frequently enhanced by the player. That is the strange part of it. This type not only influences the tone, it alters the actor's very walk and bearing. And hence it is that the player in private and the player on the boards are two personages, so different that one can scarce recognize the player in private. The first time I saw Mademoiselle Clairon, at the time a known actress, in her own house, I exclaimed by a natural impulse, "Ah, Mademoiselle, I thought you were at least a head taller." That's exactly what Gracie says when Elizabeth appears for the first time. I thought you were much taller. We have reached a point here where the film criticizes certain forms of representation and provides us with its acting philosophy and radically questions the truth. The principle of relativization. You could say that this film shows the gray areas, but at the same time as the film itself shows us, saying it like this is another platitude. Namely, Elizabeth will speak in front of the pupils and explain to them that she loves the gray areas, that she likes to embody characters who are not simply good or bad. Yes, the film can only avoid the blind spots and show them to us by negotiating them openly. Elizabeth mentions that her mother is an academic and has written a renowned book on epistemic relativism. This represents a clue that helps us to look at this film. Epistemic relativism assumes that there are different epistemic systems. There is jurisprudence, there is psychology, mathematics, but there is also something like the system of art. And these systems are often inconsumable. What is true in art is perhaps forbidden by law, or it is false. Film has its own logic. There is no absolute truth. And in acting, the only criterion for truth is what we might call credibility. Diderot says, One is one's self by nature. One becomes someone else by imitation. The heart one is supposed to have is not the heart one has. What then is the true talent? That of knowing well the outward symptoms of the soul we borrow, of addressing ourselves to the sensations of those who hear and see us, of deceiving them by the imitation of these symptoms, by an imitation which aggrandizes everything in their imagination and which becomes the measure of their judgment. For it is impossible otherwise to appreciate that which passes inside us. And after all, what does it matter to us whether they feel or do not feel, so long as we know nothing about it? End of quote. It's not just a statement about acting. In society, we always want to see a believable play. The film also shows how we constantly fictionalize reality. Joel, Gracie and Elizabeth have fictions in their heads about each other before they meet. It is also a critique of the interpretation of films. May December features, for example, a butterfly metaphor. But does this metaphor have meaning, or is it just feigned by the film to show us that we are looking as longingly as Elizabeth for a key to unlock everything, to be able to explain everything to us? At the end of the film, reference is made to an allegedly traumatic event from Gracie's past. But were these perhaps just rumors? Was there perhaps nothing to it at all? May December delivers a radical film criticism as a film and an ingenious critique of our way of seeing. Todd Haynes says, "We watch, but we don't see." It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.